Hey guys, Lord Naren White here, the Holy Ghost, the one true God. Back with you with the next video in my series reading Oliver Twist by Charles Dickens. Without further ado, returning to Oliver Twist as read by Lord Naren White. I suppose you're the new boy, ain't you? Said the voice through the keyhole. Yes, sir, replied Oliver. How old are you? Inquired the voice. 10, sir, replied Oliver. Then I'll whop you when you get in, said the voice. You just see if I don't. That's all, my workus brat. And having made this obliging promise, the voice began to whistle. Oliver had been too often subjected to the process to which the very expressive monosyllable just recorded bears reference to entertain the smallest doubt that the owner of the voice, whoever he might be, would redeem his pledge most honorably. He drew back the bolts with a trembling hand and opened the door. For a second or two, Oliver glanced up the street and down the street and over the way, impressed with the belief that the unknown who had addressed him through the keyhole had walked a few paces off to warm himself. For nobody did he see but a big charity boy sitting on a post in front of the house, eating a slice of bread and butter, which he cut into wedges the size of his mouth with a clasp knife, and then consumed with great dexterity. I beg your pardon, sir, said Oliver at length, seeing that no other visitor made his appearance. Did you knock? I kicked, replied the charity boy. Did you want a coffin, sir? Inquired Oliver innocently. At this, the charity boy looked monstrous fierce, and said that Oliver would want one before long if he cut jokes with his superiors in that way. You don't know who I am, I suppose, workus? Said the charity boy in continuation, descending from the top of the post, meanwhile with edifying gravity. No, sir, rejoined Oliver. I'm Mr. Noah Claypool, said the charity boy, and you're under me. Take down the shutters, you idle young ruffian. With this, Mr. Claypool administered a kick to Oliver, and entered the shop with a dignified air, which did him a great credit. It is difficult for a large-headed, small-eyed youth of lumbering make and heavy countenance to look dignified under any circumstances, but it is more especially so when superadded to these personal attractions are a red nose and yellow smalls. Oliver, having taken down the shutters and a broken pane of glass in his effort to stagger away beneath the feet of the first one to a small court at the side of the house, in which they were kept during the day, was graciously assisted by Noah, who, having been consoled with the assurance that he'd catch it, condescended to help him. Mr. Sowerberry came down after. Shortly afterwards, Mr. Sowerberry appeared. Oliver, having caught it in fulfillment of Noah's prediction, followed that young gentleman down the stairs to breakfast. Come near the fire, Noah, said Charlotte. I saved a nice little bit of bacon for you from master's breakfast. Oliver, shut that door at Mr. Noah's back, and take them bits that I've put out on the cover of the bread pan. There's your tea. Take it away to that box and drink it there, and make haste, for they'll want you to mind the shop, d'ye hear? D'ye hear, workus? Said Noah Claypool. Lord, Noah, said Charlotte. What a rum creature you are. Why don't you let the boy alone? Let him alone, said Noah. Why, everybody lets him alone enough, for the matter of that. Neither his father nor his mother will ever interfere with him. All his relations let him have his own way pretty well, eh, Charlotte? He, he, he. In the coldest corner of the room, Oliver sat and ate the stale pieces, which had been specially reserved for him. Noah was a charity boy, but not a workhouse orphan. No chance child was he, for he could trace his genealogy all the way back to his parents, who lived hard by, his mother being a washerwoman, and his father a drunken soldier, discharged a wooden leg and a diurnal pension of 2 pence halfpenny and an unstateable fraction. The shop boys in the neighborhood had been long in the habit of branding Noah in the public streets with the ignominious epithets of leathers, charity, and the like, and Noah had borne them without reply. But now that fortune had cast in his way a nameless orphan, at whom even the meanest could point the finger of scorn, he retorted on him with interest. This affords charming food for contemplation. It shows us what a beautiful thing human nature may be made to be, and how impartially the same amiable qualities are developed in the finest lord and the dirtiest charity boy. Mr. Oliver had been sojourning at the undertaker some 3 weeks or a month. Mr. and Mrs. Sowerberry, the shop being shut up, were taking their supper in the little back parlor, when Mr. Sowerberry, after several deferential glances at his wife, said, "My dear," he was going to say more, but Mrs. Sowerberry, looking up, with a peculiarly unpropitious aspect, he stopped short. "Well," said Mrs. Sowerberry sharply. "Nothing, my dear, nothing," said Mr. Sowerberry. "Ugh, you brute," said Mrs. Sowerberry. "Not at all, my dear," said Mr. Sowerberry humbly. "I thought you didn't want to hear, my dear. I was only going to say—" "Oh, don't tell me what you were going to say," interposed Mrs. Sowerberry. "I am nobody. Don't consult me. Pray, I don't want to intrude upon your secrets." As Mrs. Sowerberry said this, she gave a hysterical laugh, which threatened violent consequences. "But, my dear," said Sowerberry, "I want to ask your advice." No, don't ask mine," replied Mrs. Sowerberry in an affecting manner. "Ask somebody else's." Here there was another hysterical laugh, which frightened Mr. Sowerberry very much. This is a very common and much approved matrimonial course of treatment, which is often very effective. It at once reduced Mr. Sowerberry to begging, as a special favor, to be allowed to say what Mrs. Sowerberry was most curious to hear. After a short duration, the permission was most graciously conceded. "It's only about young Twist, my dear," said Mr. Sowerberry. "A very good-looking boy, that, my dear." "He need be, for he eats enough," observed the lady. "There's an expression of melancholy in his face, my dear," resumed Mr. Sowerberry, "which is very interesting. He would make a delightful mute, my love." Mrs. Sowerberry looked up with an expression of considerable wonderment. Mr. Sowerberry remarked it, and, without allowing time for any observation on the good lady's part, proceeded. "I don't mean a regular mute to attend grown-up people, my dear, but only for children's practice. It would be very new to have a mute in proportion, my dear. You may depend upon it. It would have a superb effect." Mrs. Sowerberry, who had a good deal of taste in the undertaking way, was much struck by the novelty of this idea, but as it would have been compromising her dignity to have said so, under existing circumstances, she merely inquired, with much sharpness, why such an obvious suggestion had not presented itself to her husband's mind before. Mr. Sowerberry rightly construed this as an acquiescence in his proposition. It was speedily determined, therefore, that Oliver should be at once initiated into the mysteries of the trade, and, with this view, that he should accompany his master on the very next occasion of his services being required. The occasion was not long in coming. Half an hour after breakfast next morning, Mr. Bumble entered the shop, and, supporting his cane against the counter, drew forth his large leathern pocketbook, from which he selected a small scrap of paper, which he handed over to Sowerberry. "Aha!" said the undertaker, glancing over it with a lively countenance. "An order for a coffin, eh?" And we'll go ahead and stop there for this week. As usual, I want to say thank you for watching, and I hope you enjoyed. Please like, comment, and subscribe, as it greatly helps the channel. Light be with you all. Take care, and thanks again.